Hello, everyone. Welcome. This is a roundtable discussion about Fanfest 2012. We have a number of unis here that joined us at Fanfest. Altogether, I guess we had more than a couple dozen Eve University members who were attending Fanfest in Iceland this year. And it made quite an impression on all of us, I think. I was very pleased to be there and have an opportunity to meet with folks who were only these disembodied voices on Mumble mostly, and to actually meet them in person. And it was a pleasure, a real pleasure all the way around. What we wanted to do here was have a general discussion. I'd like all of the folks that I've indicated with a priority speaker in Mumble to be considered a panelist, because these are the folks that I know were at Fanfest representing the uni. So if I've missed anybody, please give me an indication in the class.e-uni chat channel, and I'll add you to our list of panelists. I'd like this to be kind of just an open discussion. I do have some general questions, and also if people have questions about Fanfest as we go along, feel free to type them in the class.e-uni chat channel, and I will moderate and direct those questions to the panel. We'll try to get the answers to you. But first of all, let's talk a little bit about what Fanfest is, and just a little background information for those of you who aren't familiar with Fanfest. Fanfest is an annual meeting of all those folks who are Eve fanatics. CCP sponsors it. They hold it every year in Reykjavik, Iceland. This year we had it in the Harpa, which is a fantastic convention facility. You can go on the wiki and see some pictures of what that facility looks like. Brand new. It looks very Kaldari in construction, so it was a good fit, and it was a very, very nice facility. And altogether, I guess we had what? I'll leave this open to the panel, but I think we had what, about 1,200 attendees this year? Is that about right?
I think they didn't release official numbers.
I think that would have been just the paid attendees, and then there would have been like CCP employees, and there would the guests that came from like Sony and the various sponsors. It would have been something closer to like 1,800 by the time everyone was counted.
I thought it was more, of course, you got spouses and guests and so forth, so altogether about 2,000 people roughly that attended there. At least it felt that way to me. And it was fantastic. CCP uses this as an opportunity to release new information about where they're going with the company and with EVE Online, and also any other development efforts that they have ongoing. They talked a lot about Dust 5.14 this year, as well as a little bit of a preview on World of Darkness, which is the other MMO that they're working on. So let me just first turn over to the panel here and ask a general question. I'd like each of you to just kind of jump in, if you don't mind, and give me your general impressions of Fanfest. Was it worth it? Did it meet your expectations? What did you think about attending, and would you attend again?
Okay, seeing as no one else is talking, I'll jump in. I'm Fanzera, for people who don't know me, and probably everyone. I'm worryingly new to the game. For me, Fanfest was fantastic. I went to Fanfest looking for a holiday more than anything, because it was relatively cheap and there's lots of cool stuff to do. However, Fanfest as an event as a whole, as well as Iceland and all the events you get to do, it was fantastic. It was really fun. There was one of the things that kind of resounded most was it didn't feel like a games convention. It was lots of stuff about Eve and lots of interesting stuff going on, but so many interesting people to talk to and get to know, and lots of cool stuff to do.
Anyone else? Stags, what were your impressions?
Well, it's great to mix in with the CCP folks and be able to walk up to just anybody and talk to them and tell them what you think, and tell them, dude, you've got to balance, attack frigates or whatever. You can just come up and tell them anything, and they'll listen to you and they take it seriously. But the real magic is meeting all the people that you spend these evenings with, hours at a time on Mumble, and actually seeing who they are in RL. and sharing stories in person and realizing that, if you're like me, you know a few people around you who play Eve, but not that many. And here suddenly you're in a group full of people who all seriously play Eve. It feels great. It's amazing. Even people that you normally would like to strangle in the game, suddenly they're like super cool and you want to have a beer with them and tell old stories.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Some of the folks, even the goons and the test people who I don't particularly care for their style of play, when you meet them in person, by and large, they're actually pretty nice people, and it lends a whole human face, I think, to Eve that we generally don't have playing an MMO like this.
Yeah, I was going to say, like Ben Sarah said, it's not like any Games Fest you might imagine, purely because chats you can have with devs, they actually do listen to you, and they do care. They do actually care about what you want to tell them about the aspect of the game.
Another thing that I found interesting about FanFest, it is in a fairly exotic location. CCP is located there in Reykjavik, and Iceland is a really, really interesting place. It's not like any other place in the world. Polarina, I know you're a native there, and what was it like for you to have all of these people basically invading your country? And what kind of things did you hear about from folks that were not native, that were joining and gathering in Iceland?
Well, I found it very interesting myself, but it is like nothing ever you'll find in Iceland. Fanfest is just humongous. There are lots of people that are interesting to chat with, share the stories, everything. I really enjoyed my time there.
By the way, did anyone here on the panel attend some of the tours and the other things? I know FanFest not only is about Eve and talking about various aspects of the game, but they also have tours of local Icelandic sites and so forth. Did anybody here participate in those?
Lots of us were on the Golden Circle tour.
Yeah, I was too.
It was on the day before the FanFest started on Wednesday, I think.
Yeah, Wednesday. I think also that's when I knew I was at Eve FanFest, because that's when I first heard Seamus' voice. And I knew I'm with the right people now.
By the way, I see that Seamus has joined us. It is funny, though, to put a face with the voice, but I will say, Seamus, and you have to agree, you are kind of, because of your videos and your presence on Mumble and so forth, that you are rather voice famous. Did you have people recognizing or giving you a look of recognition when you were speaking there at FanFest?
Aside from other Unistas or former Unistas, not that I can think of.
I think you were telling me about someone that you were speaking to, perhaps.
Oh, right. Yes, the End of the World party.
That's right.
Somebody was commenting that I sounded familiar.
It is kind of interesting. In fact, I had comments from some folks. I asked a question during one of the panel sessions, and I had someone write to me later on saying, "Was that you answer the panel? Because I recognize your voice." So it is kind of interesting to try to put faces and voices together, and that was a great experience for me. And now when I think of, like, when I'm talking to Bear Isu on Mumble today, I think of him with his voice and his face as opposed to his avatar, which is a little different.
Yeah, a little.
I think it was one of the most unusual parts is coming back after FanFest, after being able to put faces to names, and then it puts a new spin on having conversations with people on Mumble when you know what they look like on the other side. Slightly voyeuristic, it's weird.
One interesting thing is I think I was one of the few people from the Uni who had been to the previous FanFest, the FanFest in 2011, and one of the things is that 2012, the Uni put forward, and Keldum Ravan specifically put forward a heroic effort to get the Unis all together and get them organized, and we had possibly one of the most visible corporations at the entire FanFest. We had our uniforms basically, and people could see us with our the special colored Eve University lanyards, and we were visible, and it was much, much better than last year because we could actually find each other.
There are a lot of people.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just saying the TCU helped in that regard. We owned that food hall as soon as we put that there.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know what Denny's talking about, Keldum constructed a model of a, Territorial Control Unit, or TCU, is that right?
Territorial Claim Unit.
Thank you. I knew you'd have the answer. And it had the Uni logo displayed on it, and it was very odd because we put it in this kind of section where we had some furniture sort of off to the side next to the the where you could buy food. And even when we weren't there, because that TCU was there, no one would actually use that space, which was very strange. But I guess that shows how much EVE players respect elements of the game even out in real life.
I did stop by the table while there were no other Unistas about. There were a few random strangers sitting at the table at the time.
But it was interesting how they all conceded that space the moment we began to show up. I will say one impression. I want to bounce this off everybody else. I mean, the panels were great, and we're going to talk about some of the things that we heard, and of course, being able to interact with other players in EVE. But I would have to say that the best part of going to FanFest was hanging out with the unis. Everyone that I met from EVE University turned out to be an outstanding, pleasant, delightful human being, and candidly, I now consider all of you friends, not just comrades in arm in the game as well. So I was by and large just thrilled and delighted with the uni crowd that was there. What were your guys' impressions?
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that, Neville. I mean, it was just so nice to. I think we said on the Thursday when we were having a meeting that we've owned now that it could have been so much worse if any one of us had been a complete idiot. But no one was. We were all just gone pretty much from day one.
I think the thing is, you can say that about nearly everyone who turned up to FanFest. It was quite surprising. There were obviously, the individual people who were a bit strange, but by and large, everyone was mature, fairly intelligent, and interesting to speak to, if nothing else. I mean, everyone comes from various walks of life, every age group, every kind of social background, but nearly everyone, you just sit down and talk to them, and it was very rare, at least I certainly, the number of people I spoke to, didn't find one person who I would not want to speak to again.
Well, I also really liked meeting all the Unistas and coming to FanFest, but what I really thought was the best FanFest, it was more like you were felt at home among us all. Nobody looked strange if you and talk to them. Also welcome in any conversation with anybody. Well, not any conversation, but you're welcome to converse with anybody at FanFest.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, I would have to say that. No one, you could literally bump into anyone and have a conversation about them. It didn't matter where they were from. They always have you a day. They always chatted to you. And, people that I spoke to that were in the uni. I mean, even a couple of that I spoke to, they were nice to speak to.
We exchanged messages before when we were realizing we were all going to FanFest, and someone posted the question, what if it turns out we're all, jerks and we all are unlikable people? At which point Keld said, well, we'll just boot you all out of the uni. But it turns out that wasn't the case at all. I have to say that was the best part of going to FanFest. And I would encourage anyone who's thinking about going to FanFest in the future, they've already announced the dates. It's April 25th through 27th, 2013. It will be held at the HARPA convention facility in Reykjavik again. And so we have a goal here in the Uni and the directorship. We want even more presence at FanFest. We want more of those black uniformed golf shirts there to make an impression on everybody and be part of this really great event. So if you haven't started saving your money and thinking about doing some planning, we encourage everyone. We'd like to have at least 50 unis there next year, if not more.
Well, even though if you at that time is not in the uni, you should come anyway. You can always hang about with some of the old uni guys, and you meet a lot of new people, or whatever new corp you might be in.
I think it's especially good if you're thinking you may want to graduate and go to another corporation afterwards, because you can meet some great folks there and get a sense of them in person that you can't do in an application process, so you know kind of who you're joining. I know there were some alliances / corporations who came to events that Eve University was at so that they could talk to us afterwards and try to recruit some of us to come to their corp. It was flattering.
It was very flattering. And in fact, we had folks coming by who recognized that the Uni is a place for new players, and they actively, tried to recruit some of us, which is very flattering, I think. I mean, we had a lot of that going on during the entire event. We have a few questions in chat. Let me take some of these and pass them on. And by the way, if anyone does have any questions, we will be getting into some more specifics around content and so forth, but let me try and address these as we go along here. Let's see here. Gaxar asks, what about non-Eve players? What is there for them to do? I know they had a spouse program. I think they called it the Sisters of Eve and so forth, so which is kind of sexist, actually. Anybody here take advantage of any of the, or bring folks here who are not Eve players along with them, and what did they do?
I just heard stories about it. First of all, the Golden Circle tour on Wednesday. Where did I link it? I linked it in chat. Class. The Golden Circle tour, we got to see 4 or 5 sites in Iceland, like the geyser, the large fountain, and a volcano and stuff. And the Sisters of Eve, I link. That's a 1-day trip for spouses or friends or whoever comes along and doesn't want to go to the convention. I think it's on Friday, where you basically do a wider trip with like horse riding and other weird stuff.
Thanks, Bear. I will say Iceland is a beautiful place, although the weather was a little mixed there. Anybody else have an impression on things for non-Eve players to do?
Last year, I came here with a friend of mine and my mom because they wanted to take photos and some related stuff. So they did go on the Sisters of Eve tour. And basically it started with these monster vans, giant wheels, and they just kind of drove out across Iceland, the snow and the rock and stuff like that, without any roads, all the way out to these volcanoes. And I know there are some stories about a Jeep passing them and getting stuck, and lots and lots of ice and glaciers, and some other stuff, but I know they have some good stories from it. So,
did anyone here go to the charity dinner? I know they had that on the opening night too. They have a big charity dinner.
Yeah.
What was that like?
Oh, it was really nice. I was a bit pushy. I came one of the first people in, so I made sure I sat with besides a developer. It was quite loud because the building is made very acoustic, so it enhances sound. And it's a bit of disadvantage because there was quite a lot of sound, but it was very nice to sit down, talk to a developer, and talk to a few people around the table. The table was a bit too big, so the people sitting on the far end had a bit difficult talking to the developer. The food was nice. The starters was really good. We had some salmon with a few vegetables to it, and then we had some cod. It was also nice, and then we had a big portion of lamb afterwards, and it was a bit too much for all that meat, and would have been a better balance with a few more vegetables to it.
Yeah, but you're in Iceland, and it's not a great place for growing vegetables.
Well, really,
it's
they
a
can't
great place for raising sheep or for fish, but not vegetables.
They still have a lot of greenhouses, and it's supposed to be the best restaurant. Can somebody find? So they still have a bit of vegetable, and so much for being a. Oh, Khalid, could you stop keying up? So about.
I'm muted.
Good. So if you want, most people are not used to having so much meat in one meal, so it becomes a bit overwhelming and you get a bit bloated in your stomach with such a combination of meat.
Speaking of food, we had kind of a couple restaurants, and of course they have taverns and bars nearby, but we always seem to end up at the same one, which is pretty good. I think there's a picture of it on the wiki site too. So, and Ellen asked a little earlier, is there a lot of drinking there? The answer is yes, there's a lot of drinking there. Especially for how many people went to the party at the top of the world, which is the big bash right at the end of FanFest? I know I really enjoyed it. The music is fantastic. Anybody else?
Yeah, I did, but I left quite early because there's just too many people for my taste.
I was there as well, but I had to leave pretty early to go to the airport.
Yeah, I think you had a 4 a.m. pickup time the next day, if I recall correctly. Well, let's talk about FanFest itself. We'll give you some atmosphere. One last point about the atmosphere, and then we'll get into the content. I'd like to hear this from the other panelists as well. One thing that really, really made an impression on me is that the CCP management and the CCP developers universally love the uni. They couldn't have been any more gracious and more thankful for the work that we were doing. In fact, they've asked us to do even more of what it is that we're doing today. But that actually was very, very humbling, I think, to have the CCP team be quite so. In fact, I can't think of a single major main 10 event where the Eve University wasn't mentioned as an example of how to help players get more proficient and have more fun in the game. Did you guys experience the same thing? Let me hear from some of the other panelists and some of your interactions with the CCP developers.
Yeah, if you just wearing the uni T-shirt or the Yan, they basically gave you much kudos. Did CCP? They had.
Thanks, Denny. Anyone else have any direct interaction with the developers? Because I know I was constantly getting bombarded by compliments and questions from them.
It's not just the developers, the players also, even from goons and test players where you normally wouldn't expect it come from.
Yeah, it is. It's quite amazing when you go to an event with a couple of thousand people kind of milling around, which has 200 or more thousand subscribers, who in a lot of people's lives that you'll never interact with in game because you're a universe apart, do completely different things. But you go up to them, but they know the uni. Everyone knows the uni. They know exactly what the uni does, and no one has a problem with it. Everyone encourages it, and everyone knows it's a good thing for Eve. So There's no kind of, you might get, the occasional animosity from people like Poetic because, just because they can, but on the whole, people like the uni.
Yeah, that was a really nice thing to see because being in the uni, we hear about a lot of people who don't like it and what they don't like and stuff like that. But, people don't come to us in-game and say, well, at least not to me in-game, and say, you do amazing things, or because we're already surrounded by what we do all the time. It was really nice to be there and see that, most of the people in Eve really does care about what we do and is happy with it. And, that's encouraging to me.
Yeah.
So I had quite a few chats with developers. I suggested a few things for how to follow the game. One of them was a model, and a lot of the developers liked it, but probably not be implanted because they're planning on something similar. And another thing about, I talked to the developer who this of storylines and doing the renaming, and he just nodded and smiled when I commented on what I would like. And nodding and smiling just means that it's not going anywhere at all.
Well, it's either that or it's like, yeah, that's exactly what we're planning. Yeah. Don't give anything away.
I'd have to say I was struck by... this is really an opportunity for the CCP developers to get feedback and to get ideas, and the roundtable discussions, they were really seriously paying attention. I went to a variety of roundtable discussions about new player experience, and they were very, very keen to get ideas. Some of them they're not going to use, but some of them they asked about specific kinds of things. So I definitely think FanFest is an opportunity for EVE players to influence what eventually ends up in the game. Would you guys agree with that?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think
Indeed.
the two ones that I recognise as possible things that are going to be coming through. New player experience one. I believe that it just occurred to them in the room that the captain's quarters had just given them their best training tool and they didn't realise it.
I agree with
Yeah, and the second one was the Vanity Goods roundtable. Turned out that Unifex was there, and we didn't know who he was at the time, and he was quite surprised how much we wanted to buy stuff in game as long as it wasn't pay to win.
Yeah, he thought that was a dead issue, but it's amazing. And they did talk about, well, what about if we had paint schemes and logos on your ships so that you could show corporate affiliation, or maybe even corporate uniforms you could put on your avatar? And everyone said, yeah, that would be awesome. We would pay big bucks for that. So I think we might see some new options for some of the vanity goods that we weren't otherwise seeing. What else did you guys hear from the CCP developers? Any kind of where they were soliciting input and trying to get your opinion?
I think one of the biggest things they were looking for input into generally is just how to keep people playing. Not only as part of the new player experience, but also in terms of just getting people to log in day to day. And, just giving things to people that are reasonable, that they can add into the game that'll keep people playing and then attract more people as a result.
Stags made a comment in chat here about CCP constantly asking, what do you think of this feature or that feature? I mean, tell us a little more about that.
Yeah, I was picturing the virtual goods session as part of it, and the marketing session with CCP Darth Beta, when she was asking some questions, and we had people in the audience who liked things or actually remembered old marketing programs from years ago and said that was effective, and I think she was shocked at that one. She didn't think anyone noticed it or that it had done anything, and they were very much listening to what we had to say, and taking notes down and reconsidering their positions on things. A few times they got caught by the questions and thought, we just never considered that matter, and we definitely should go in and see if we can fit it in.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the big stories at FanFest, and let's start off, first of all, there was a lot of discussion about Dust, and in fact they had a whole room where you could go in and play Dust, and we actually got some indications at FanFest about how Dust and Eve will work together in the same universe. Did anyone here have a chance to try Dust, and what were your impressions of Dust?
There's a question was what Dust is. Well, yeah.
Good point.
Yeah, let me give an indication or a quick definition. Dust is a first-person shooter game that will be on the Sony PlayStation and operate on their network. Basically, the premise is that you are, I guess you could say, some kind of space commando, but it's all set in the EVE universe, and the EVE Online will operate in the same universe as Dust. So there will be interaction between spaceships flying in space and the various soldiers that are fighting on the different planets. In fact, they actually showed at FanFest how spaceships could be contracted to provide orbital bombardment of certain kinds of combat sites in the first-person shooter game, which I thought was extremely cool. What was your impressions of that, folks?
Yeah, that was a cool feature. I mean, it was being hinted at in the previous trailers, but to actually see it at work was quite extraordinary. I don't know a lot about programming, but I know that was a big thing to be able to do.
Well, I actually played Dust as I entered the competition where you could win a PlayStation. Unfortunately, I did not win a PlayStation, but we did beat the first team we were up against. And I'm not a person who's been playing a lot of first-person shooter in my life, and certainly not I've been playing PlayStation or Xbox or anything like that. And I've not been playing first-person shooter because it gives me motion sickness, but Dust did not give me motion sickness, so I can play Dust if I like to do that. And if we forget about couldn't find out how to control or do anything constructed to support my team, my impression of Dust was it was very well working. I like the different features you could have in it, and what really I really liked, if you stand next to a tank which gets explode, you'll get the damage also. So I think there's great potentials in Dust.
I had fairly mixed views personally regarding Dust. I found it to be a bit slow, like the kind of mechanics they're going for, being able to jump into vehicles and do a lot of different jobs around you. Obviously, you've got just the soldier and then the bombardment, and then you've got essentially a logistics character who can repair people and also set spawn points or drop points for the rest of the team. It's a bit too slow. Everything takes a long time. You have to, if you order a vehicle, you have to wait. You want to respawn, you have to wait. You want to do anything, you have to wait. But you die really fast. So it's a bit too slow paced for kind of, I think, what they're going for. A few other things really bugged me, like if you're a sniper, the sway on the weapon that is supposedly this magical futuristic weapon, is ridiculous. Kind of, it looks like you're just waving your weapon around in front of you. It's a bit silly. And I don't know if that's just because it's beta and they're still going on with it, but yeah, it just seemed a bit slow paced for me for the kind of game they seem to be going for.
Yeah, I'd agree with what Fen said there as well. I did actually take CCP Flying Scotsman to one side in the nightclub on Friday night and basically berated him for 10 minutes about how awful the control system was on Dust. It wasn't a great one. The rest of the game I do like. The design work in particular.
Fleetfoot Donahue, you are breaking extremely badly.
I'm sorry about that. Scotsman said that a lot of people had said about the control system, and they're working on it.
And there have been some speculation that it may be available on other platforms, although it will be exclusively on the Sony PlayStation, at least on initial release. So we'll have to wait and see how that goes. But yeah, the CCP clearly is putting a lot of effort behind Dust, and next year, FanFest, the feeling is that they'll have a lot of Dust people attending as well.
Yeah, at the charity dinner, one of the guys mentioned how he was disappointed that Dust would not be released for the computer, and the CCP dev said something like, wait 12 months and see what CCP does. And I'm not sure if that was just generic kind of response or whether that was anything specific, but it sounds like from everything I gathered that they are planning on moving this to other devices soon as they work stuff out after release.
You just have to talk. I talked to some dev, I don't know his name, and asked why they implemented the keyboard and mouse support, why they specifically highlighted the keyboard and mouse support. And all he said was, yeah, why would we do that?
No, I think it's clear that they'll eventually go to other platforms, and I think we can expect to see that, and that'll help expand the universe of potential players as well. One thing I did not see, which I was disappointed, they showed how the combat would integrate with Eve and Dust, but they did not talk about how the economic system would integrate. I mean, I know that everything in Dust is supposed to be built by Eve players and vice versa, so I want to see that because that might be an opportunity for, frankly, making some ISK in Eve, so we'll just have to wait and see what that looks like in the future. Did anyone hear anything did I miss something about the economic systems and how they might link together?
They weren't really sure about it. There might be some transfer of ISK directly to some characters, but mostly the production stuff will probably start in Eve.
I can say a couple things about that. What we do know is that they hired a second economist to specialize, more on the Eve side of things. So he works with Dr. Ao to do their planning, and they coordinate very closely. Two is we know that Sony gets a percentage cut of anything bought on the PlayStation side, but not on the Eve side, and that people buying everything on the Eve side and then transferring it to their Dust characters is a sensitive subject for Sony, and so they're not saying too much about transfer of things between the two, so as not to scare Sony at this point in the process. I do know that they are very aware that Eve players look at the Dust game as a potential market and want to know what they can build in Eve and sell to Dust players to make ISK. And they're definitely thinking about that kind of gameplay.
Excellent. It's good insight, Stags. Thanks. Let's talk about some of the other big things that were announced. Of course, the big release coming up, first a pre-release in April, and then the big release in May is Inferno. And Inferno is supposed to be all about combat, and in particular, a revamping of the Crime Watch system and the War Deck system. There's a certain degree of controversy about this, of course. What were your folks' impressions of the new War Deck system and the associated Crime Watch system?
Well, one of the things that didn't come up in the presentation by CCP about Crime Watch, and I wonder if this was intentional by them to not kind of really get everybody riled up, but the fact that if somebody was basically the new Crime Watch system would have the same GCC flag as they do now, but there would also be a suspect flag, which would make them flashy to everybody, but not set Concord on them. The interesting thing is that they wanted to get rid of all one-to-one aggressions. So if somebody shot at that suspect, they have a few choices. One, they can make the person who shot at the suspect a suspect themselves and let everybody shoot at them as well. Or they can not let the suspect shoot back. The third option was, of course, to start a pre-arranged duel between those characters, or kind of a pre-arranged duel thing automatically when they shot at each other. But that didn't actually come up in the presentation, and it was halfway or so through the roundtable discussion thing before it came up, and I wonder if I was kind of worried there because it should have been a big deal. CCP should have been talking to us about it, and I wonder.
Just to clarify what Watch is, it's the system that takes care of standings, of aggression timers, of timers when you jump through something, and everything in that direction.
Yeah, basically Crime Watch tells you who's going to be red flashy to you and for how long. And so the feeling is that CCP shared with everyone there was that Crime Watch is complicated and needs to be simplified so that when you get involved in combat, you know who to shoot. Let's talk about the war deck mechanics. Sorry about the background noise, folks. Obviously, the CCP's announced that they want to make wars a little bit different than how they operate now. And the formula that they've come out with, at least that they've talked about so far, is that the larger the alliance or corporation, actually the larger the alliance, the more expensive the war will be. And that was obviously a controversial decision. Some people see that. I think personally that favors the uni, so I'm all for it. But I'd like to get your folks' impressions about the proposed war deck mechanics and whether you consider that to be fair or unfair.
They were certainly better.
I think it's reasonably fair. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. The whole idea that they proposed or put forward while they were doing the entire presentation was that you are paying for targets. You are paying off Concord to allow you to PvP in high sec essentially, or just to war deck people because you want to. But you are paying for targets, and if you deck a 10-man industrial corps because you want to grief them, you're paying the same amount as if you want to war deck a 2,000-member corps with people active all over high sec, and that doesn't make much sense. I think it makes a lot of sense that if you're paying for targets, you pay for the amount of targets you're getting. I think that's a really good change. Not only does it, yes, it benefits the uni, and I actually think it's kind of unfortunate because it means the chances of the uni ever getting war decked again is practically nil. Especially if we, get a lot of new members, because I mean, as it stands now, unless they change it, it's going to be 750 to 800 mil a week with the uni's current user base plus any alts we get into this new core. It's going to be over a bill very quickly. And then it can only go up. So, yeah, that would be my thought. It's kind of unfortunate that the uni will never get war decked again, but in the long run, kind of on the whole, I think it makes a lot more sense that if you're paying for targets, you're paying per target.
One thing I should note, I think CCP is restructuring the war decks in a very similar manner to what they have now. They don't want the general mechanics of the wars to change very fast. So what they're doing is putting this in place with new code that they can extend and modify as time goes on. So they may be revisiting war more than just this one time after they get this code settled.
Yeah, I have a couple thoughts too. One is if you weren't following everything, not the aggressor, but the recipient of a war declaration has the opportunity to invite an ally or allies to come in and help them. So if Eve University wants to participate in a war, one option we have is to offer our help to another high-sec corporation that we think could use a little help in the field, and then we can put our people out to war with them. That was a thought.
That's going to interfere with the whole uni neutrality thing, probably, though.
True, absolutely.
What you could do,
Every
as
war
opposed
does.
to that, would be having just a group of people. Well, you could say that you could have another court within the uni, which were mercenaries who could be hired by the courts.
And another angle that people need to remember is when we get rid of the war deck, because my assumption is we'll get rid of all those war decks as soon as the new system goes live, because they won't benefit us anymore. So if we get rid of that, every logistics pilot is going to be able to take a deep breath and have a much better experience clicking on people and applying energy transfers and repairs, because they're not going to have to worry about all these fake warnings about war decks going on and their ETs dropping off. That's going to be nice for us.
Although that will be true if they modify Crime Watch with or without any war deck changes involved.
Also true. Could be, potentially.
There's a very tight relationship between Crime Watch and the War Deck system, and there's a lot of confusion, I think, as well, as to where one begins and where the other ends, because it all has to do with aggression and who you can shoot at. At the War Deck panel discussion, the Q&A session, I was struck by 3 or 4 CEOs of small, high-sec corps who say, our purpose is to grief larger corps like the uni, and you're taking that away from us, and you're destroying our game, which I don't know if you guys heard that same kind of thing, but I had some folks who were very upset with the War Deck system because it was now no longer cost-effective for them to be able to grief the uni and other large corporations. Did you hear that as well?
I heard something similar, yeah. I think one of the things is that I kind of understand where they're coming from, their point of view, in that they want a PvP in high-sec and stuff, but also, yeah, they are just looking to grief people. They're just looking for easy kills, which I think it's just cheap and pathetic, really. So it will make it a lot harder for people to, have wars in high-sec, but, so they go to low-sec, do faction warfare.
Yeah, I agree. And they are revising faction warfare. Let's go to that. Did anyone go to the faction warfare discussion that I know they had a panel on it. Did anyone attend that? And I'll take that as a no. And that doesn't surprise me because most of the unis are not that interested in faction warfare. But I know there's going to be changes to faction warfare, and in fact, it sounds like it's going to be much more territorial and be more relevant. So a slight revision. The other thing that I heard, I don't know if you folks heard this, but I also heard rumors that data core farming is going to either be greatly diminished or go away completely, and that the source of data cores, which of course is how we do research in T2 manufacturing, will be exclusively the domain of faction warfare. Did anyone hear that as well?
Yeah, people are pretty pissed about it. I think there will be some changes to it, but it's a good direction to do things, to put things in the hands of the players, like data cores or blueprint copies or things like that.
Yeah, I'd heard the same rumors too. There were quite a few people annoyed, but in fact, it needs to have a player system that works better.
Yeah, Denny, I'm sorry, your packets are breaking up, so we're not hearing you very clearly. But I think there's a lot of speculation. We'll just have to wait for the dev blog to see what exactly is going to happen and see how we all have to adapt to that.
one thing I'm hoping for with faction warfare is that they can reduce the penalties associated with participation. I mean, when you have people basically players refusing content in game because the penalties associated with participating in such content are so high, then you definitely have a design problem. So I think that I'm hoping that they will address that.
I think that they will. I mean, they understand that faction warfare was kind of a half-built feature, and their intention is to flesh that out, and we'll see that in the 2 Inferno releases. Let's talk a little bit more about some of the other things that we heard at FanFest. One thing they talked about repeatedly was improved graphics, an improved graphical experience. They showed missile turrets, and they showed new shading, new models. There was an art panel. What were your impressions, first of all, folks, of the new missile turrets and the missile effect?
Yay!
Yeah, wow, I think does justice for that.
They were hard to see in the trailer video they had for it. They didn't show anything long enough to really see what it's really going to look like. And I was kind of wondering why they chose to do that. But if they work on it some more and get it down right, I think they could be really great.
Yeah, they don't have enough video producer types in the company to meet all their needs, especially now that they have to split the team across making videos for Dust and making videos for Eve. So I wasn't surprised that the special effects videos were all last-minute things and fairly short in nature. But yeah, they showed a variety of couple things. Some of them were actual effects in development, and others of them were kind of future stuff that they're experimenting with and thinking about, but are not committed on the roadmap, so to speak. So things like the missile weaponry striking shields, and you can see that it's striking shields. When the shields go down and you're hitting armor, it's striking the ship, and you can see it's hitting the ship. That kind of stuff was really cool and was real. But the stuff where CCP Torby Franz got up and showed, here are holes being burned through the body of the ship, and it's breaking up into chunks and that kind of stuff, that's for future things, and that's just experimentation and not on the roadmap. But it was cool visuals.
Yeah, I like the sample video they had of shield damage, armor damage, and then clearly bits of the structure being broken away. I think that would be, first of all, a good, useful in-game visual cue, and secondly, it just looks really cool. One of the things that Unifex talked about in his presentation, or one of his presentations, was support for DirectX 11, and he asked the crowd, do you want this? Of course, who doesn't want better graphics? But what were your impressions of those improved models and more detailed models that they were showing? I mean, if they had to divert away from features to more eye candy along those lines, would you favor that?
I assume you mean kind of like the tessellation stuff and the NVIDIA panel part.
Yep.
Is that what you mean? Yeah. I thought that was really impressive. It clearly showed kind of the stuff their engine is really capable of, and it did look great. Unfortunately, I just don't see the point. I mean, yeah, it's great, and if you have a graphics card that can do it, fine, go for it. But it's the high-res asteroids. Do we really care? I mean, we're zoomed out so far, we can usually not see our ship anyway. Being able to see the little ridges on the top of a carrier, which is already massive, it just doesn't seem necessary in a game like Eve. It's not like, in FPSs where you're looking down the barrel of a gun all the time, so you want it to look pretty. It just seems a bit unnecessary, and it's going to be a massive resource hog as well. So whether or not it's realistic to actually have on in-game at all times, I doubt it. I certainly won't use it. Because I don't want to spend £600 on a graphic card to do it.
Sounds more useful for people who like to make game videos and fan videos and stuff.
Yeah, that's true.
One important thing about the particular technology they're doing is it basically breaks the screen up into a grid and says, okay, we want just about one polygon per point on the grid, and then it generates those polygons. The closer the model is, the more polygons it gets. The further away it is, the less, which means that it is very scalable. So lower graphics cards can generate less polygons and have actually less work to do, but still have an even quality over the entire image, rather than further away objects looking like they have more finer polygons, and the closer objects having these big blocky polygons. And I think that's an advantage you could see even on small, lower-end graphics cards. This is a technology thing, a procedure thing, and not a CPU or graphics card power related feature. So you might want to keep that in mind.
The general trend that I saw was movement towards more sophisticated graphics eventually, although I don't think we'll see any of this. They showed a lot of speculative stuff, more detail, more of an immersive experience, and I think that can only be good over time. One of the other trends, or one of the other themes that I heard over and over again was this very clear understanding that there's this three-legged stool in Eve of harvesting things, crafting or building things, and then destroying things, and that the emphasis in Eve has been very much on destroying things, maybe a little bit on building and not much on harvesting. And we saw some or heard some things about how can we make these other legs of the stool more interesting, more exciting. In particular, I was very excited about the announcement about ring mining, which sounds kind of like incursions for miners, and some other enhancements that they hinted at about helping improve the harvesting and the building part. What were your impressions, and what's your feelings on those potential enhancements as well? Nobody cares.
I really like the ring mining idea, but they didn't say a whole lot about it. I mean, basically everything we can construe from, they want it to be kind of like fishing, where you have scouts that go out and find veins, and then you mine out the veins. I mean, yeah, that's one thing, but it's a long ways off, and I mean, it's really exciting to know that you may be able to get some of the moon minerals, and they may break some of the big alliances hold on the P64 or M64, whatever they're called. The big expensive moon minerals. But that seems like it's probably going to change a lot before it comes out. So,
in talking to the CCP folks in between sessions and at the party at the top of the world thing, they kind of look at the EVE player base as chunked up into different kinds of players. They kind of see, some folks as being into PvP, some into PvE, some into exploration, some into crafting and industry. And they think of a whole chunk of people being into mining. And it makes kind of sense for them to think things like that, because they look at the statistics of what people do in the game. It's easy for them to think that if someone logs in and spends 80% of their time mining, that they're probably into mining. When you and I both know they're probably at work with the window open on the other screen and they're AFK mining while they're doing something else, but that doesn't really count as part of their gameplay time. I mean, it could be, but it looks to them like, those are people mining. And they're trying to bring something new to different people who don't always get attention. PvP players have been getting stuff. What can we do for PvE players? Well, let's mix up a little bit of new stuff for miners and little new stuff for industry, etc.
Yeah, the general trend that I heard was much more. I think Inferno will set the stage for a revamp in the entire industrial economic system. And in fact, if you watch the recording of the presentation by the economist at CCP, which is fascinating, by the way, and you can look it up on YouTube, you get some real clear indications as to where they're going to try and maintain or build more balance in the economic system in EVE. So we may not see that in Inferno, but definitely it's something that's getting some attention and love from CCP down the road.
I'll recommend the economy presentation as well. It's enlightening. It's really quite interesting listening to the guy talk about kind of how the EVE's economy works and how it's broken down. And kind of the problems are coming from places you don't expect.
Now, I think we'd be remiss in this panel discussion if we did not talk about some of the controversies that happened at FanFest, and there was a big one. How many people here went to the Alliance presentation? I know Keld was the first speaker there. We had a number of others as well. Maybe I should just ask, what what were your impressions of the Alliance presentation?
Next time we should send someone who is drunk, utterly drunk, to level it up.
Yeah, that seemed to be the general theme. Although I have to say, just to start this off, for those who don't know what I'm talking about, there is an annual panel where the major alliances or some of the major alliances talk about their corps and where, or their alliances and where they're headed and so forth. And that traditionally has been very mature rated and colorful. And some of the folks that show up there have been in somewhat of an inebriated state. Well, it was very much the case this year, to the point that the Mittani, who was elected to by an overwhelming number of votes to the CSM, the Council of Stellar Management, eventually had to resign the position because he named a particular player in the game and encouraged everyone to attack that player, which is against...
No, not player, character. He named the character. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And that's a very important distinction to make. That's true. So it was definitely controversial, no doubt about it. My impression of the Alliance panel was I thought Keld did very well and represented the Uni very well, and then it kind of went downhill from there. But that was my general impression. Anyone else?
I like
That's funny.
I like the two warmer guys, the first one and the second one with the ransom. They were funny. But the rest was just utterly drunk.
Yeah, I watched it on the video feed, and I'd have to go along with Neville on that. I thought that the Kel's presentation was very organized and pretty professional, and then it went downhill pretty fast from there, and I don't know, maybe it's just I'm too far away from college, but I just don't care to watch a bunch of drunken frat boys spew vitriol from a panel.
I think the, what's their name? The third guy, I'm actually forgetting the name of the alliance now.
The gentleman.
DNS?
That's the one. Gentleman's Agreement.
Gentleman's Agreement, that's it.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting, kind of, because his presentation was actually a presentation about his alliance. They were talking about kind of how they got into nullsec and how they became part of the CFC, and that was actually quite interesting. But yeah, the other presentations weren't presentations; they were just people kind of. It was a contest to see who was the bigger dick, and that wasn't interesting.
Well, contest to see who was the biggest bastard in a game of combat and money and power, but Keldon was there to run the charity, so.
Well, I think that even the alliances, though, that are engaged in other activities, like people from Goonswarm and so on, there's nothing in the world that says that you can't have a professional presentation that basically says who you are, what you're about, what you do, and why you do it. My biggest problem that they had there was, one, I don't think I really care to see a bunch of watch drunk people, especially when I'm sober. And I think the people on the panel should be sober. And I think the presentation should be a bit more polished and professional.
Yeah, I think we may see some changes next year. I mean, because obviously what ended up happening was, I mean, here we had CCP trying to get some positive press about new release, Dust coming out, all these new things. I mean, one thing that came out very clear in all of the CCP presentations was, we're sorry for some of the bad things that happened in Incarna, and hopefully Crucible was a proof that we are paying attention to you, and now we really are paying attention to you. And then to have all of this happen, where the gaming press grabs onto it and says, this is about bullying and so forth, which I think is a bit of an overstatement to say the least, really was kind of a black eye in what otherwise I think was a very positive event for CCP. So I didn't see that CCP had any choice here, but ultimately to ask Mittani to suspend him for a short period of time and ask him to step down from the CSM. Does anyone disagree?
I think they did the right thing.
No, I don't think they had any choice but to do that. I mean, it was really kind of a PR and marketing disaster what he pulled there.
Well, you gotta understand. There's some guy who gets on his alt and isn't upfront about who he is, and sends email to all these high-level CCP guys, and to every partner who was on the list of sponsors of FanFest, and to major journalists at places like Massively and Kotaku and stuff, and he writes a one-sided mail about what happened and demands something be done immediately. So the journalists contact CCP and say, so, what went on? And CCP says, well, we'll go look into it. We'll have an investigation. So then they write inflammatory letters about CCP opens big investigation on, etc. And then they write a lot of other inflammatory stories. Did any of them contact the gentleman who wrote the original letter? No. Only the players did. Because like a lot of things in EVE, the players are the ones who end up really doing the research and digging into things to try to find out what really happened. Only the players.
Well, regardless of the news media attention to it, I think Mittani called out people to specifically target a single player, and that is actually covered by the EULA under harassment guidelines. So
no. He said character. If you want to know about targeting players, there are a lot of people who sent sent emails to the Mittani afterwards with pictures of Google Maps with his house circled on it. Now that's targeting a player, a player.
No, but I mean the character. If you target a character, it's actually covered under the EULA, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And he should have known better, and he says he was thrown in under a bus, but whatever. What I'm curious though is, you guys who were at FanFest, that story, I know it was big in the media and stuff, but did you hear about it while you were at FanFest, or did it only come out when you got back and then everybody was talking about it on news media sites, or was it discussed at FanFest by CCP, or did you just talk about it among yourselves when you saw it on the news media sites? Or?
Didn't hear a word of it at FanFest. Nothing.
Yeah.
I didn't hear a word for it a week after FanFest.
I actually didn't notice it in the keynote that it was at the Q&A at the end of the panel, and it was just chaos and no one bothered.
Yeah, I'd have to say, I attended the event and I kind of shrugged my shoulders and said, well, this is exactly what I expected from these guys, because that's their persona in the game. And there were some humorous parts of it, but I did find some of it over the top, but it's always over the top with Goonswarm and Test and so forth. So you didn't hear that much about the controversy. That came out later. I'd say, in fact, I was surprised when I was reading the press about all of a sudden this became a big thing. But you're absolutely right, Flay. Technically, if you look at the EULA, that is in violation, and that's the leverage point that they made to make this argument in the press about, cyberbullying, which again I think is an overstatement. But at FanFest itself, I didn't hear much. Anyone else?
I didn't hear.
I just thought I'd throw in my 2 cents worth. The thing that I'm seeing though with this whole with the Mittani thing, is that he was telling people to grief the person, not the character. He said, if you want to see this guy commit suicide, this is his character's name. I think that steps over the character person behind the character barrier, and it becomes real harassment.
One of the things I noticed was afterwards, the Mitani did issue an apology, and he said much of the same things. And he said, "I was drunk, but that's no excuse for my behavior. I let myself be in that position." And then people in the thread were saying, "You're using your drunkenness as an excuse? That's no excuse." And it's like the same thing the Mitani just said. They're saying it again and saying your apology isn't worth anything because...
I really
yeah.
need to rehash all the fucking arguments
But still.
that have been going on about these things.
Sorry.
Oh, dear God, man. I think we can move on to another subject, because otherwise we'll be here all week.
My apologies.
I agree. I don't want to rehash everything. You guys can watch the Alliance presentation video. We've got that posted in the chat channel. You can watch it yourself. My point was, these things do happen at FanFest, and when you get to see them, they become part of the event, and you miss certain aspects of them if you don't get to see them. You're not as an informed player, then it just becomes a surprise to you when you read it in the press and you get to see these things in other contexts. So again, I think it's another reason to go to FanFest, so that you can see these kinds of things unfold live, if you will, and you can form your own better informed opinion. Let's talk a little bit about some of the other aspects of FanFest. I know that they were chatting a little bit about improvements and some of the other mechanics, but let me just turn to the panel. What was the most thing about EVE or EVE Online or Dust that you heard that made the biggest impression on you, that you're the most excited about?
Carbon Rest. Carbon Rest is their new API system that will allow changes to in-game information from the API. So basically you'll create a new API key with an edit option for your contacts, for example, which is going to be the first thing they let you modify. So you can actually, from a web page or from an application you write, you can add a new contact. And that's kind of just the first step towards some changes, because I can see very quickly after them having contacts, them having EVE mail. You can send out EVE mails to other players in-game and then from other applications. And I could see beyond that also corporation API keys, allowing you to modify corporation members' access, their titles and their options. And that allows people to create kind of forum systems where it's integrated with the game as well. You go onto the forum, this person has done good, they're going to become a director or something, you check the director in the forum, it updates the game, it updates Mumble, it updates the forum access, gives them all of that stuff all at the same time, rather than having to keep everything the same.
Yeah, the API development was very cool, and I don't think everyone completely recognized all of the potential implications as they were talking about it. But Santhra's right; there's some big implications for how a corporation or alliance could operate more smoothly, as well as for third-party applications, etc. Any other impressions? What other things that you heard that you got excited about? What was the thing that made you most excited that you heard at FanFest?
The new UI. They just showed 2 or 3 screenshots of it, and it's work in progress, etc. But it looks good, and it's not like now the windows everywhere. It's like a game UI.
And the tactical overview, which is really kind of bland and not terribly helpful, actually looked cool and useful. Did you agree?
Yes.
I would have to say those are entirely concept. They don't exist.
Yeah, sure, but it's a good direction.
Yeah. Oh yeah, they look fantastic, but yeah, I did ask, and they are entirely concept. They exist as nothing more than pictures at the moment.
I want to see it, though. I thought the tactical overview looked really, really good and useful, and obviously they're thinking about how to enhance that rather plain experience into something that's a little more immersive and more useful. What else did you guys hear that you got excited about?
Salvage drones.
Oh, of course.
Yay!
Yay! Thank God. And a lot more modules. I think I was sitting next to Gibson Thunderbird when we were talking about all the new modules, and he physically just slumped, and you could hear the groan because he means, oh God, we're going to have to reteach everybody how to fit everything. And the answer is, yeah, you're going to have a lot more flexibility now. So I think they hinted at a lot more modules, like the micro jump drive, which lets you jump about 100 kilometers quickly after a quick startup, 5-second startup. That sounded real cool to me.
I thought it was a 20-second spool up.
Is it 20 seconds? That could be right. Was not exactly sure, but some
20
capabilities coming.
Yeah, 20-second spool up, 5-minute cooldown.
Salvage your drone? Go ahead.
I'm sorry, Neville, I was just going to say, yeah, I thought in particular the module you were talking about sounded like one of the most exciting ones, and I'm seeing that at least potentially has PvP applications, unlike certain other types of, like workhorse stabs you would never use, but this looks like something you might could.
One interesting thing about it. Oh.
Yeah, go ahead, Xanthra.
One interesting thing about, you mind if I talk a little bit about my thoughts about each module, or?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Some of the highlights.
So, the micro jump drive is an interesting one, and it's kind of going to be an anti-sniper sort of thing, where frigates become a real threat, because they'll start spooling it up kind of just before it activates. They'll align out towards the enemy sniper fleet and head 90 kilometers towards them. But one of the things I was talking with Gibson, it'd be important for heavy interdictors to be able to place a bubble that interdicts that particular micro jump in high sec as well. So you'll see sniper fleets with a heavy interdictor or something mixed in, so they can light their bubble and prevent those frigates from getting close very fast. That'll kind of change some of those dynamics. Another module they mentioned was a anti-blob ECM system, where the more players that are targeting you, the more likely they are all to be jammed out. So if you have a blob of 30 people locking somebody, there's a good chance they're going to be jammed out, whereas 5, not so much. That's going to be interesting to see how that balances with Logies. As long as it has a long cooldown, maybe 30 seconds to a minute at least, maybe even 2 minutes, that could be balanced in a good way. Like an emergency, oh, I'm almost dead here, hit that, everybody relocks, maybe the Logies have a bit of time to lock you up again. Then there was, what was the other one? There's another big.
Yeah, they were talking about changes to NOSes and newts and how that might reflect back.
Right, those were cap batteries. Because everybody tends to use cap rechargers and not cap batteries, in general, because of the much lighter fitting requirements of the cap rechargers and the low actual bonus to the, or low total cap increase of the cap batteries, they figured they would have cap batteries reflect newting and nosing effects back at their originator. So if somebody puts a newt on you and you have a cap battery, it has a 10% chance per cycle or something to affect the person who's newting you. And that could potentially change things for particularly capital ships. If they're worried about getting newted a lot, they can put in some cap batteries or something. There were also some resistance mods that were going to kind of shift with the incoming damage. So you have, you're shooting them with a lot of EM. Their resistance mods will automatically kind of shift towards EM resist and lower the others. So that kind of means that switching ammo every once in a while, or pounding them with a bunch of EM and then having a bunch of explosive hit them soon afterwards, will kind of overwhelm their defense in an interesting way.
Yeah, I also heard about modules coming to enhance drone performance, that the salvager drones will be one, and we'll get some new electronic warfare drones, perhaps webbing drones in multiple sizes, which would be very nice. None of this definite, but other than the salvager drones, but it's all coming, and I think it's going to dramatically change how we think about fitting ships and trying to optimize their performance. Let's talk a little bit about also some of the things that we heard. Again, sorry about the background noise here. Let's talk about some of the things that we heard related to future enhancements that they kind of hinted at down the road. I mean, we talked a little bit about industrial changes. We talked about graphical changes. But I think overall, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Pauses.
Yes, that's where I wanted to go to. They definitely hit it about making pauses more ship-like in fitting and easier to get and to use. Did you guys attend the session or discussion on pauses?
I did not, but the most important thing is that they're thinking of making pauses available to individual characters, rather than simply to corporations, which makes it able for members in EVE University to anchor their own POS somewhere, rather than having to only rely on the corporation's POS.
And I also heard that the intention with pauses is that you could dock at them and you could change fittings, and so that would make them much more useful in wormholes, and the wormhole folks were very excited about that. Well, we've been going here for, about an hour and 20 minutes. Let's go ahead and wrap up. I'd like to hear from my panelists, just any general impressions that you heard, and also what advice would you have to someone who's thinking about coming to Fanfest? The next Fanfest will be April 25th through 27th, 2013. Would you tell people to come, and what kind of advice would you have for them? Anyone?
I would recommend to anyone to go there. It's a blast. I even got a Rifter model. I link it. Oh, wrong picture.
That's right. It's the 10th anniversary next year. That's exactly right, Cora.
That picture. I bought it at the. It's a silent auction for a good cause. I paid a lot for it, but it was worth it.
Any other panelists? Any general impressions? Any final advice? I mean, my advice is, if you haven't thought about going to Fanfest, you should. It's a great experience. You get to meet fellow unis. You get to meet other people in the game. The parties are great. The food's great. The environment's great. You get to see some of the things that are both good and bad about EVE, which is makes you much more informed. So if you haven't started saving up to come to Fanfest next year, I encourage you to do that. Any other final thoughts? Okay.
Go.
Yeah, that's a good way to describe it. Go. All right. With that, then, I think we'll close out, and once again encourage everyone to go to Fanfest. Take a look at.
Right. Sorry. Overall cost. I paid 500 euros for the flight. That's around, $700, I think. And I didn't take the cheapest hotel, but overall cost for the trip without food and beer and stuff was around 1,200 euros for 6 days, and I paid around $600 on my credit card, including the Rifter model. But I didn't. You can go way cheaper there.
Yeah, altogether for me, it was about a $2,000 experience, but I'm very high maintenance, so I'm sure you could do it for less money if you were more budget-minded. Well, I want to thank our panelists and thank everyone for joining here today. I will be posting this recording to the class library if anyone wants to refer to it or if they missed any part of it. Thanks, everyone. See you at FanFest next year. Good luck and fly safe.
And come.
Go.
Free hugs.
Yes, free hug.